Namaste to all the viewers and welcome to another session of our book reading session. So today we should be reading a completely new, a different topic compared to what we have covered so far. But it is also continuation of one of our old streams which we were covering earlier. So the topic is on Rammohan Roy, Unitarian Christianity and Hindu modernism. Specifically speaking, we are going to just outline how exactly the progression of Brahmo Samaj happened during its earlier, you can say, forming phases, and the relation with Unitarian Christianity that Rammohan Roy and the Brahmo Samaj had. Yes. So, Rishi, any starting words for now?
Yeah. Namaste to all of the audiences. Um, uh, Nina as well. So, remembering the past streams that we have done, starting from Bengal Renaissance, uh, was it a blessing? I'm paraphrasing the title because people know as to what we are referring to. From then onwards, we have come across a long way and various set of ideas that were roaming around at that time, just after uh, company rule has been established in Bengal. By now, we see that there are majorly two competing ideas that were there, especially in the upper echelons of British intelligentsia residing in Bengal. One was that of Orientalists, represented by William Jones and other such scholars of Asiatic society, who were trying to analyze our, or let's say, Hindu history or Indian history, and trying to make sense of it, but with a bit of sympathetic lens that they had, or views that they held about our civilization. And then there was the other portion as well, the Anglicist, or those who were a bit Christian, much more gung ho in their approach, which were supported by some missionaries as well. So they were here critically looking at India and trying to make sense of the history and then come up with provisions as to how the company must manage its rule over here, and which meant proliferation of proselytization zeal of the Christian nation, the Christian creed itself. Now, amongst these two ideologies, the clashes were happening, and at that very moment, we have uh, a man arising from a zamindar background and then reaching up to the echelons of this intelligentsia itself. And he came across both of the currents and then let's say, made his own career. But we'll see much more as to what sort of ideas that sorry, as to what ideas he held. We shall see in this stream. So, one thing that I would like to say is that it will not directly be about Rammohan Roy's personal history, as people would think. One who has clicked onto this stream today, they might have some sort of conception that, okay, today we'll learn about Rammohan's personal history and so on. No, it will be not so much about that, but it will be about the intellectual history which he was representing at that time, and the uh, succeeding evolution that will happen because of it in rest of Bengal and then in rest of India. So uh, I think we should move on, I guess. Yeah, Nina, what would you say?
Yes. So, yes. So, as Rishi has said, we are starting off at a period when there is a kind of response coming from the Hindu side itself, which was not just, you can say, engaging in translating works for the British or the missionaries, you can say, but now they were coming up and you can say propagating the ideas in a very strange fame which was partially developed by the, you can say, the missionaries or Orientalists, but also uniquely evolving in its own manner, you can say. And of course, Ram Mohan was a man who basically began he, this campaign as a reform movement and so on. So uh, we know about the usual kind of glorifications of him as a reformer, as a, you can say, the, you can say, the first man of a the first man who tried modernizing India in a sense. Uh, so yes, with that in mind, we basically begin a re-evaluation of him and the influences that were cast upon the his legacy, that was Brahmo Samaj. Specifically, today we will cover the Unitarians. So yes, we shall begin reading now. So, Chapter 1: The Unitarian Social Gospel and the Foundations of Hindu Modernism. On September 28, 1833, a funeral sermon was delivered for a Bengali by a prominent British Unitarian in the port city of Bristol on the west coast of England. Rammohan Roy had died a day earlier while visiting the Carpenter estate in Stapleton Grove. The Reverend Land Carpenter, who had known of Rammohan and his work for 15 years, spoke with great depth of feeling about the career of the enlightened Brahmin from the British capital of Hindustan, who was undoubtedly a Unitarian. My heart is with the Unitarians, the Bengali had told Carpenter often. The Unitarianism that in Carpenter's mind linked Ram Mohan to his British counterparts represented a new and radical approach to religion, society, and ethics. It was a pioneering faith that emerged out of the changing conditions of the 19th century world. It challenged many of the religious presuppositions of the traditional societies of Eurasian civilizations. Though Unitarianism was never a mass movement, the implications of its protest had quite far reaching effects among the modernizing intelligentsia in India. Three simple though radical ideas of the time, 1815 to 1835, provided the link between the enlightened few in Calcutta and the enlightened few in England and the United States. The first was liberal religion, or the substitution of a rational faith for the prevailing popular religions of the world, which they thought increasingly curtailed the freedom of human beings by enslaving them to mechanical rituals, irrational myths, meaningless superstitions, and other worldly beliefs and values. The second was the idea of social reform or emancipation, in which all known penalized classes and groupings, such as workers, peasants, and women, were to be elevated through education and the extension of civil rights to participate fully in the benefits of modern civilization. Finally, there was the idea of a universal theistic progress, or the notion that the perfectibility of mankind could be achieved by joining social reform to rational religion. Though dead, said Land Carpenter of Ram Mohan Roy, he yet speaketh, and the voice will be heard impressively from the tomb. That voice, which still can be heard by his intelligent Hindu friends, will continue to express the Unitarian credo. Here is a quote: "It may excite them to renewed and increased effort to carry on the work of intellectual and moral improvement among their countrymen, to diffuse the pure light of religion which his writings contain among those who are yet debased and superstitious, to give the advantage of a wise education to the young and uninformed, to rise themselves and teach others to rise above the narrow prejudices of caste and sex, and thereby weaken that thraldom which so much intercepts the progress of truth and virtue, and elevate by knowledge those who may thus be the friends and companions of the present generation, and whose early instruction and training will so much promote the welfare of the next." One tragic aspect of Ramon's death was that it precluded a meeting with American Unitarians whom he admired and with whom he had hoped to establish closer ties for a coordinated Unitarian programs on an international scale. One, William Ellery Channing, whom a Unitarian later called the Ram Mohan Roy of America, was since the revolt of 1815 a leading spokesman of liberal Unitarianism in the United States. According to Lucy Aiken, who corresponded with Channing from England and who had met Rammohan at various social gatherings in London, Rammohan had spoken to her on September 6, 1831, of his ending his days in America. I have just seen the excellent Rammohan Roy, she wrote, and he speaks of visiting your country and to know you would be one of his first objects. After Rammohan's death, she recorded sadly to Channing that Ray has been frustrated of one of his cherished hopes, that of seeing you face to face, either in this or the other hemisphere. The second American Unitarian with whom Ram Mohan evidently had long years of correspondence was Joseph Tuckerman. Indeed, the reason why Ram Mohan came to Stapleton Grove as a house guest of Land Carpenter was to discuss preliminary matters in anticipation of Tuckerman's visit to England in 1833, when the Unitarian representatives of three cultures were to meet and discuss a common program of social action. The ideology of liberal Unitarianism was slowly emerging from the parallel experiences of like minded individuals in Boston, Bristol, and Calcutta. Channing, who was Ram Mohan's equal as an inventive and versatile genius, did not begin his revolt against the established church until 1815, when he was 35 years old. The main target within orthodoxy for the Harvard-trained Unitarian liberals such as Channing, Emerson, and Parker was Calvinist religion and ethics, with its stress on man's damnation and God's vengeance through the eternal fires of hell, as well as the notion of predestined election of a privileged few. In Orthodox Christianity generally, Channing and the others repudiated all forms of religious revelation, the doctrine of Trinity, and those aspects of popular religious behavior that prohibited the human being from achieving that sense of unity with God, experienced only by those dedicated to a life of reason. Most probably, however, the most radical departure in the thought of Channing and other Unitarians was not on the level of theology and religion. Though it is true that the abandonment of revelation for intuition led Unitarians into the mystical realms of monism and transcendentalism when modified by reason and constructive social philosophy. This led not to otherworldliness but to intellectual emancipation. In fact, the general Unitarian outlook was itself a reflection of a new social conscience and consciousness. So he refers to the transcendentalism in the example of Emerson mentioned here, who was Ralph Waldo Emerson, the you can say the great writer of America of those times. That he transitioned later to transcendentalism. Yes.
Indeed.
So Rishi,
Celebrated
any
by
thoughts
even the
on part
conservatives that
until
time.
now?
Yeah, so as you can see over here that Unitarianism was an expression of uh, liberal outlook, which the then English intelligentsia, especially the Anglo-Saxons, were having at that time. And the kind of ideas, the three ideas, right? The first one is a rational theology, uh, where you need to get rid of all of the superstitions, the rituals, which were binding down people, right? It wasn't allowing the freedom that they needed.
Yes, and
And
as you can
then,
see, its emphasis on rationalism was very strong. So much so it was going against, you can say, earlier Protestant streams. That it was
true,
rejecting fundamental doctrines like Trinity.
yeah, absolutely. I think even over here, right, when you read about the Harvard trained Unitarians, so their objection was not, like you said, not even to the Trinitarianism alone, but also all forms of religious revelation itself. And then they were also trying to oppose, I think, original sin too, I guess, right? Or the sinful nature of man himself that they were trying to argue against, which the Calvinists were talking about, I guess, at that time. The Calvinists themselves are Protestants, after all. Yet they were talking about the in fundamental, according to Christian scripture, the fundamental sinfulness of man and the retribution which God takes after they get hold of them in that eternal hell. All of those things were seen as superstition or otherworldliness, and therefore needed to be rejected, as far as the Unitarians were concerned. And then we also see what was the second one? Yeah, emancipation, right? Social reform. So the classes which were relegated to the boonies, or the classes which were not really uh, holding on to resources as much as the elites were. So they needed to be emancipated and brought back to the equal footing of the others, of the privileged few. I guess that was the second point as well. Uh, what was the third point, near
Yes, I can
at the first
scroll
page?
up for that.
Yeah,
This one.
universal
Finally, there,
theistic progress.
yeah.
Yeah, so or the notion that the perfectibility of mankind could be achieved by joining social reform to rational religion. So altogether, it was an amalgamation. I don't. Although I have a question, Nina, what would you think of the third point? Was this at all something independent? It seems like a uh, coagulation, in fact, the fusion of the first two ideas, right? It's nothing different
Yes,
at all.
it's basically that. And their whole the thesis in the third point is that the first 2 points inherently are you can say oriented to perfecting of mankind. That is what they're trying to say, probably.
Aha. Okay. Okay. So, so utopia, basically, they were trying to create by this, uh, where the
Yes,
whole mankind would be emancipated. And this is later on, as we see, is also uh, explained in that small excerpt of that speech which was given after the funeral. But what is surprising to me is that the American Unitarians were so much interested into this as well, and they were trying to get hold of Rammohan Roy. And Rammohan himself was also trying to have contacts with them, and even venture into a much more, what should I say, a multinational project, in fact. They wanted to do that as well, that they would like to launch a world movement of Unitarianism where every single society would be emancipated and so on. Seems very much like
exactly.
the
And another thing I
modern
would like to
day.
point out. So
Mhm.
that is one thing, but something really important that people might miss. This was a very elite-driven movement because from the American side, for example, all the people participating were, you can say, the Bostonian elites, the people who called themselves also Boston Brahmins in those days. The people who were participating in this in England were also were not any ordinary people. They were actually people of wealth and so on, who could actually afford to travel around to America, to India, and other places. As we see, the daughter of land carpenter actually visits India maybe more than once,
True.
if I'm correct. And the the person, the elite, you can say, who is also engaging with them. He is also, you can say, elite par excellence because there is perhaps no one above him in stature in India at that point among the,
Indeed.
you can say, Anglophile elites at least.
Absolutely. And we mustn't forget that Rammohan was in service of certain aristocracies in India at that time, as well as the
He
British
was sent on you can
company.
say, the request of the Mughal emperor to England. So he
Yeah,
was not any ordinary person.
absolutely. Uh, so the socioeconomic background needs to be reminded. Like the audience should be reminded of that again and again when discussing about these set of people. Also, what I was trying to say is that this suspiciously makes me remind of the modern day uh, movements as well, right? So various movements which come out from the developed nations, uh, they try to do this thing as well, that okay, we want to spread our great ideas to everyone in the world so that we may live happily ever after, and so on and so forth. So this set of beliefs and ideas, I think uh, it's an expression of proselytization itself, right? And
Yes,
which
very
was
much
root
so.
of
The
Christianity
you can
itself.
say the obsession with progress, the obsession with reform, that itself formed their religion.
Indeed, indeed.
So yes, we can continue reading from here then. Just a second.
Hmm.
We read till here, right? Most probably.
Yes.
Okay. So, most probably, however, the most radical departure in the thought of Channing and other Unitarians was not on the level of theology and religion. Though it is true that the abandonment of revelation for intuition led Unitarians into the mystical realms of monism and transcendentalism, when modified by reason and constructive social philosophy. This led not to otherworldliness, but to intellectual emancipation. In fact, the general Unitarian outlook was itself a reflection of the new social conscience and consciousness. According to one biographer, Channing was not content to preach an arid religion from the moral isolation of the pulpit, but sought to realize his Christian ideals in the marketplace of daily living. In an important sermon entitled Religion, a Social Principle, he referred to progressive religion, which purifies men's minds by stressing good done to others. Religion was no private affair between man and his maker, he said, nor was it a secret to be locked up in our hearts. Rather, religion is to be communicated, shared, strengthened by sympathy, and enjoyed in common with all. The underlying assumption of the new social gospel of Unitarianism is contained in the simple sentence by Channing, which was radical for the time he lived in. Every human being has a right to all the means of improvement which society can afford. Like most Unitarians, Channing was a staunch abolitionist and believed that never will man be honored till every chain is broken. He expressed a strong sympathy with those oppressed by colonialism, and in 1840 he viewed his own work in establishing night schools for workers as the start of a social revolution. As he put it, I see in it a repeal of the sentence of degradation passed by ages on the mass of mankind. I see in it the dawn of a new era in which will be understood that the first object of society is to give incitements and means of progress to all its members. Joseph Tuckerman, with the same Bostonian upbringing and the Harvard degree as Channing, is equally affected by the misery of the poor and underprivileged. In 1826, he left a well-to-do congregation to whom he ministered in order to work and live among the urban poor of Boston. Soon, a chapel was constructed for his use, which was not only a religious center but a social welfare center designed to find ways and means of alleviating the agonies of poverty. In 1839, a tract of Tuckerman's was published describing his philosophy of religion as a social gospel and his method for coping with the problem of the poor. As was common with pre-Marxist reformers, he attributed poverty to intemperate habits and rebuked those who profited from the small pay of poor working men, earnings that were diverted from family savings to gain mills. He was dismayed with the callous indifference of nominal Christians who ignored the masses in the city and made no allowance for the fact that these people would increase in proportion to the increase of urban areas. After describing the grim life of the poor, he advocated a program of moral training and attending to physical wants as a mean of inculcating the desire for self improvement. When Tuckerman came to England in 1833, he immediately lectured in the new industrial cities of the Industrial Revolution, where he found cesspools of humanity living in conditions that defied description. Land carpenter's daughter, Mary, was so taken with Tuckerman's humanitarian spirit and practical efforts to help the poor that she turned to social work as a career. When in 1835 Tuckerman returned to America, he left behind in Bristol a society for visiting the homes of the poor of the congregation. The carpenters could now gain entrance into the families of the poverty stricken to render assistance to them directly. Mary Carpenter was its secretary for 20 years. Land Carpenter had himself come to the same conclusions as had the Americans about the need for religious leaders to help the poor. In 1817, he had first come to Bristol to take over the congregation at Levinsmead, a notorious slum neighborhood in the port city. There, like Tuckerman in Boston, this well educated elitist would so modify his sermons as to be appreciated by the common man, and he was certainly the first minister at the Unitarian chapel to attract a mass following. Again, like his American counterparts, he stressed education and moral training for the purpose of self strengthening. Until his death in 1840, the same year Tuckerman died, Carpenter remained consistently liberal, both socially and politically. Carpenter joined the anti-slavery agitation in 1824. He worked to alleviate the deplorable conditions in British prisons, and in 1831 he joined the great struggle for the passage of the Reform Bill. The Reform Bill was a bill to basically, you can say, expand voting rights even to more and more people, not just the aristocrats.
Okay, so suffrage.
Huh. Moving towards universal suffrage, you can say.
Okay.
So, equally interesting are Carpenter's theological expositions on the new Unitarianism, which not unlikely influenced Rammohn Roy in Calcutta. In a discourse published as early as 1810, which Carpenter entitled On the Importance and Dissemination of the Doctrine of the Proper Unity of God, there is a brief but illuminating summary of the pillars of modern Unitarianism as it later came to be known after its formal inauguration in England and America in 1825. There was, for example, an eloquent defense of what may be termed the pivot of Unitarianism, or the belief in God without second, which is so reminiscent of Ram Mohan Roy in his own writings. There was the stress on Christ as an ethical teacher, which again recalls Ram Mohan's approach in his Precepts of Jesus, written a decade earlier. There was a Carpenter's defense of the Unitarian doctrine of atonement, which not only denied all the mystery and metaphysics surrounding the crucifixion, as well as the Calvinist view of sin and damnation, but also reestablished the image of a merciful God full of justice and compassion for mankind. Besides rational theology and social gospel, there appeared a third integral part of liberal Unitarian ideology, which not only set off Unitarians from the more orthodox Christians in their own culture, but contributed greatly to bridging the differences between themselves and the more enlightened portion of contemporary Calcutta society. That same liberal religious and social spirit which Unitarians attributed to their imitation of the true ethical Christ, they gradually extended tolerantly to peoples of all cultures. If most religious institutions at the time were moving away from universal humanism and rationalism of the 18th century towards the romanticism and nationalist self-glorification of the 19th, Unitarians maintain an outgoing cosmopolitanism which ultimately became the most significant pillar of the Unitarian faith. On June 8, 1826, Joseph Tuckerman, in a response to an appeal from Rammohan's Calcutta Unitarian Committee, printed and circulated a public letter addressed to American Unitarians asking for their support in missionary enterprises. Rammohan Roy, the Unitarian spokesman of the East, quote unquote, began Tuckerman has solicited our assistance in establishing there in Calcutta a perpetual Unitarian mission. Tuckerman then went on to say that native gentlemen in India have contributed largely to the cause of establishing Christian worship upon Unitarian principles in their country, and they, with their English associates, are earnestly requesting the aid of Unitarians in England and America for the accomplishment of their object. This is quite an important reference because, as we know, in 1823, Ram Mohan Roy, along with William Adam and, if I'm not wrong, Devendranath Thakur also, they were the ones who initiated this Calcutta Unitarian Committee. So even before Joseph Tuckerman and, you can say, Land Carpenter himself were in their peak phase, you can say.
True,
So any
true,
thoughts on this,
absolutely.
Rishi?
And Yeah. So, as we read till now, right? First and foremost, we get to know that Unitarians were trying to. The second point that we had read way back, right? What Nainer mentioned of social reform, of trying to emancipate the proletariat, no, proletariat. Uh, that was being done by the Unitarians even in their own nation, England and Americas, right? We get to know how in Bristol there was a society for uh, trying to access the poor people over there. The slums which they had seen in London, that was horrible, and they tried to uh, uh, change that condition at that time. That was deplorable, uh, and it was at fast, I guess, in front of them. So they were trying to be this whole what did they say, ethical Christ, which they had in their mind. They were trying to replicate that every single time. So, like Christ in the in Bible tries to approach the poor, the lepers, the people who are outcasted in the societies. So he goes and serves them, quote unquote. They were trying to do that as well in 19th century, as we see at the peak of industrial revolution in England and in Americas. And then the another point that is very interesting, the more they engaged with it, the more they became so-called religiously attached to Unitarianism itself, the more they became cosmopolitan. In fact, what happened is that, as you said, right, they opposed colonialism as well, in fact, because of it.
Yes,
And they started to approach the natives of other nations with sympathy. As we see way later down in, maybe we'll read someday in future about him as well. So J.T. Sunderland, we shall read about him, how he tried to write works in favor of Indian independence and so on. He was again an American Unitarian way down in 20th century. So with enlightenment, religious sections of societies were becoming very much suspicious of the pernicious nature of the enlightenment values systems, which were completely disintegrating the religious framework, right, in European society itself at that time, the traditional society. And
very much so.
they were trying. Yes, please.
No, I was just affirming. You can continue.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So due to that, they were trying to oppose this sort of aggressive rationalism, and even trying to go towards romanticism, as is noted by the author over here, and also in nationalist self-glorification as well, because various set of nation states were then we could say expressions of the particular religious tradition of those nations itself, right? So England was reflecting the Anglican Church. The Belgians, the Belgian kind of Catholic, I think, right? The Catholic also might be the Calvinist as well. Those kinds of flavors which were being represented by those nation states. So national glorification, self-glorification itself became part and parcel of those religious movements at that time. But contrary to this, the more religious, so-called, the Unitarians became, the more cosmopolitan they became. And in fact, as is noted by the author here, it became almost the most significant pillar of Unitarian faith. And we know that right now, even Unitarian churches in England, in USA, are the most what should I say? Like, one would say, it's like in
Liberal?
New York
Like,
City. If, yeah, liberal, yeah, ultra liberal. If New York City was made a church, that would be basically Unitarian Universalism, as they say. Right now, that's the church name, I think. Unitarian Universalist Church, which supports every set of people. I have seen that some set of Native Americans are there. The black people, Chinese, brown, everyone, even other religions are welcomed in there to give sermons and so on. So that sort of ultra cosmopolitanism became literally the main attribute of Unitarians later on, as we shall see. Now,
And in a sense, there
coming
is an
back to
irony.
Bengal. Yeah. Hmm.
There is an irony because this, you can say, this kind of cosmopolitanism, it would have not been possible without an empire existing in the first place. So Ram Mohan Roy would not be English educated enough to head there without that kind of without the empire.
Absolutely, absolutely. Without having that empire, especially access to those set of people as well, right? Uh, Without the context, without the networking, how would you even think of getting over there at all? It would be like venturing into totally unknown areas, and that was really scary at that period when we didn't know what was happening at that time
Yep.
in those places at all.
Yes. Very much so.
Now, coming back to Bengal, this is very interesting that Mr. Tuckerman, he suggests that the elite natives of India are promoting Christian worship upon Unitarian principles. So, Christian worship upon Unitarian principles must not be confused with the ordinary Christian worship at all. It's not the same as the one normal Christian people practice. It's something very different, as we saw how it was a glorification and somewhat imitation of the ethical Christ. So that sort of worship was being promoted, as is being noted here by Tuckerman, and with the help of their English associates, especially with other like Nina mentioned about William Adam, so the ex-Baptist missionary or padre who became Unitarian later on. Also, one of the best friends of Mr. Rammohan Roy. Uh, he joined in with this whole project itself of Unitarian committees and Unitarian Church, which was made in India for the first time. What he says over here is there was this whole notion within these set of elites that they were wanting the help of the English, the original English and American Unitarians to spread this set of ideas and movements into India. And there was this plan, I guess, as well, which is unknown to many people in India. And I think this should be known right now with the context as well. Because many people, when they try to talk about Christianity, they do not go into the nitty gritties at all. And they are exploited because of that at times in polemics and so on. Yeah, Nina, please.
Yes. So with that in mind, we can probably continue reading ahead. So
Sure.
especially noteworthy about Tuckerman's letter was his commentary on the principles of missionary enterprise, which he appears to have shared with another sympathetic American Unitarian named Henry Ware, the same Henry Ware who had corresponded with Ram Mohan from as early as 1821. If I'm correct, Henry Ware and William Adam they published at least one text together as well. So that
True.
level of cooperation was
True.
there. It was on
Yep. Yep. Yep.
basically on the conversion of Hindus to Christianity in India.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that
Yes.
is the kind
Absolutely.
of discussion going on. So yeah, we keep that in mind.
Uh,
On the surface, Tuckerman's conviction that the Christian gospel was superior to anything indigenous in Asia for the purpose of effecting religious and social reform may seem to differ little from the attitude of the Orthodox Christian missionary. But a closer examination of Tuckerman's position reveals that what he meant by Christianity was not the institutional trapping that followed Christ's death, but simply Christ's acknowledged teachings, which could be readily adapted anywhere. Rather than equate Christianity with Western civilization, he demonstrated how the benevolence of Christianity modified and improved civil government and public morals in the West itself. Moreover, Packerman rejected the most common beliefs by Orthodox missionaries that all non-Christians were heathens consigned for all time to damnation. Packerman could not accuse God of partiality in conferring the benefit of revelation upon so small a portion of the human race. To him, it was a shockingly false idea that the actual knowledge of revelation is necessary to salvation. His conclusion was that Christianity ought not to come to India to save souls, but to improve the human condition and society. From what it has done, bad as Christianity is, we can demonstrate its adoption to the condition and to the wants of all men, and its tendency to an indefinite improvement of the human mind and character. Channing's remarks on creeds, intolerance, and exclusion is equally revealing in the context of developing Unitarian universal humanism. Christianity, he argued, was a spirit rather than a fixed creed, dogma, institution, or a theological system. Christian truth is infinite, he wrote. It is a spirit of boundless love and cannot be reduced to a system. Thus, the spirit of Christ's teachings and can transcend human diversity or the immense variety of opinion and sentiment in the world. His conclusion, directly applicable to Unitarian missionary principles, is contained elsewhere, but he is only meaningful when set against his liberal interpretation of Christian spirit, which to him was not an integral part of any cultural system, but was free, tolerant, and adaptable. Precisely how and when Unitarianism reached Calcutta, if indeed. Okay, before that, any remarks on this
Yes.
section? Because this was quite interesting.
True, true, true. Absolutely. I mean, it's a marvelous section, in fact. Goes into the deep dive upon the machinations which are being applied at that time. So over here again, we come across this guy. So Henry Ware, you were talking about him, right? For the
Yes.
audience, maybe in our uh, upcoming sessions of on this series at least, we will discuss about a very crucial letter of Rammohan Roy and this guy Henry Ware, where Rammohan Roy actually gives suggestions as to how one must proselytize the Indians here. That would be interesting for audience to know and reflect upon. Okay, so unlike the Orthodox missionary, uh, the Unitarians were far more into social reform, in line with promoting the ethical Christ rather than the resurrected Christ. I must say, I guess. Uh, the resurrected Christ is the crucial dogma within the Orthodoxy, right? Even I think Paul, in one of his letters in Bible, uh, I'm forgetting that he says over there that the disbelief of Christ's resurrection is uh, the belief in Christ's resurrection is the ultimate linchpin of uh, faith that there is. If one doesn't believe in that, that's not a Christian at all. So, more than that, I don't know if Unitarians ever rejected that. Because usually they used to reject the miracles and other superstitious portions of Christianity, but they diminished that portion, the resurrected Christ, but in fact they elevated the ethical Christ instead, and they wanted to transpose them onto other cultures so as to elevate them uh, to the standards of the then current Western civilization. And over here, he also makes this clear as well that how there was a distinction, like Western civilization, quote unquote, equals to Christianity. Therefore, Western civilization is superior. Hence, Christianity is superior. This kind of rhetoric was not used by the Unitarians. In fact, Unitarians used the other. They kept Christianity on top. And they said that West became great because of
Or
Christianity.
they kept basically not even Christianity, because they just stress on that vague idea of Jesus's, you can say, teachings.
True,
So,
true, true.
so
Sorry,
what
sorry.
we can derive from this is that, so of course, it is undeniable that Ramon himself was Unitarian, but was he Christian with the same character as other Christians, as a missionary? Not exactly, because this character of a Unitarian is far more, you can say, reformist and liberal than anything, you can say, normal, from a normal Christian, though they do stress a
Absolutely.
lot on Jesus specifically.
Yes, yes. This is such an important point because right, in normal polemics that happens in India and in academic discussions as well. Whenever Rammohan is cited as no, he wasn't a native as such. He was a very much westernized guy. Therefore, he was Christian leaning and so on. So the obvious objection which comes from the other side is no, he wasn't. He rejected Trinitarianism. He rejected the superstition. He rejected miracles and this and that and those set of things. This is the go-to reply that we get. But here is the part that we should keep remembering, that he was Christian, as in sorry, not Christian. He was a Unitarian. Therefore, his main point was of reflecting the ethical Christ. It wasn't about the mumbo jumbo theological Christ of resurrection and the miracles and so on. It was mainly about how to implement that ethical, those so-called ethical teachings of Christ to elevate the masses that he was observing at that time. So, in that regards, we have to frame that whole conversation, I guess, because every time that is not done, there is a disservice made. Yeah, Nina, you were saying.
Yes, just a second.
Yeah. Okay, so another one which this also should be remembered by the audience as well, that Unitarians, unlike the Orthodox Christians, were not like dissing in today's language, if we call dissing or hating upon the heathens and they shall burn in hell for the rest of eternity and so on. No, because of their liberal character, they were like, okay, this revelation cannot be for a certain section of people and rest will be totally devoid of it. That cannot happen. God is not so partial. He is all kind and so on. So how can his kindness be just to a certain section of people, aka those who follow him? Because there are others who never even knew about Jesus at all. So they made a proclamation after that. This revelation itself is beyond cultures. It is not, uh, what should I say? It's not. It doesn't have any blinkers. It's totally open. It's adaptive, and it can change any society because these are all so-called ethical ideas which can seep into any human beings as they are universal and they are bound with what uh, what did they say, it's made of boundless love and kindness and so on. Therefore it's not at all unusual to invite the so-called heathens to our churches because these set of ideas are so natural to them that they will eventually become just like the ethical uh, Christ was at that time. So, any comments that you have on this, Nina?
Not many comments as such. I can continue
Okay,
reading, I think.
okay, fine.
So, yes, we continue reading from here. Precisely how and when Unitarianism reached Calcutta, if indeed it reached there at all by diffusion in its earliest stage, it is impossible to say. It may be argued that Bengal Unitarianism was a movement parallel to the Unitarian movements in the West, but some caution must be exercised in the judgment for the reason that the conditions which gave rise to it in Bengal were not akin to historically to those of England and America, nor when viewed as a functional equivalent. Can it be said that the ideological developments in Bengal and the West serve the same purpose? An alien ideology, whether Marxism today in Bengal. He's referring. This book was written in the I think 1960s or 70s. So in those
Yes.
days, Marxism was very prominent. So he's referring that way. Or Unitarianism over a century ago should be seen essentially in terms of historical and cultural relevance. It should be analyzed in the manner it stimulates change or in the manner it is adapted by the receiving culture for its own purposes. A hasty generalization might also be drawn from the unremarkable coincidence of events in the early history of modern Unitarianism, both in the East and in the West. We have already seen how Channing, Tuckerman, and Carpenter led their revolt against orthodoxy, approximately 1815, and their revolt became formally accepted within the establishment of the Unitarian Association in 1825. In Bengal, Rammohan Roy began his leadership in the Hindu Reformation in 1815 after he settled permanently in Calcutta. His revolt against the Orthodox Hinduism of his day occurred between 1815 and 1820, which is when he writes a lot of tracts on, you can say, his so called version of Vedanta, as we will
Yes.
cover in future streams. By 1822, he had helped form a Calcutta Unitarian Committee, and by 1825-1826, his scattered writings in their cumulative effect already contained a kind of syllabus for the activists dedicated to Hindu reform. No doubt, there is a connecting link between Calcutta and the West which helps to explain the simultaneous happening of overtly similar acts. Certainly, the progressive part of the world of the time was on the eve of momentous economic, social, and political revolutions. And certainly, as far as the religious community was concerned, Unitarians are among the most articulate early advocates of the varieties of social emancipation that would ultimately result from the revolution. But between India and the West, there was a great elementary difference with reference to these momentous changes. No industrial revolution, no universal suffrage, no voting at all, no universal compulsory education swept through India in the 19th century as it spread through England and the United States. Thus, the Bengali Unitarian, operating from the British capital of India, could only participate intellectually in the modernization that was radically altering European cultures in the last century. So long as the fundamental material aspects of modernization were arrested in their own country, the corresponding reformation of Hinduism was bound to be limited because only a comparative handful could be educated as moderns. It was also bound to be exotic, not in a cultural sense, but socio-economically, because the technological environment remained comparatively primitive, you can say. This leads to a second vital area of difference between Bengali Unitarians and their Western counterparts. The very presence of alien rule in India created a rather delicate psycho-cultural relationship between the native intelligentsia and the British officials. There were two basic cultural attitudes of concerned British officials to Bengalis and their society: the Orientalist and the Westernizer. The well-meaning Orientalist type tended to be sympathetic to Indian traditions and went so far as to engage himself in academic research geared to rediscovering the Hindu past or to systematizing existing uh, available knowledge of Indian civilization. As a social reformer, he started many projects designed to update Indian traditions and institutions by fusing them with modern values from the contemporary West. He fashioned himself as a syncreticist, a modernizer of the Hindu traditions. The well meaning westernizer, on the other hand, who tended to downgrade Indian traditions as dead and useless, urged instead complete assimilation to Western cultural traditions, which were in his mind increasingly equated with modernization. This conflict of modernizing alternatives between Westernizers and Orientalists, known in history as Anglicist-Orientalist controversy, is of considerable significance in our present context because it provides a frame of reference for the development of Bengali intellectuals, including Unitarians such as Rammohan, who learned English well uh, and was close to a number of Europeans in Calcutta, was greatly influenced by the cultural atmosphere, attitudes of the foreigners to whom he related and whom he used as windows to the West, as I have shown elsewhere. Rammohan lived during the Orientalist period of policy formation, and it was Orientalist scholarship that provided him with building blocks necessary for his ideological reconstruction of Hindu society and faith. In comparison to the Western Unitarianism, therefore, the Bengali variety was a far more complex phenomenon, in that the problems faced by Rammohan Roy were always magnified by the perspective of cross-cultural contact. Unlike Channing in America or Carpenter in England, who sought to convince their country to liberalize the religion and care for the underprivileged among them, Ram Mohan was continually challenged by the question of Europeans in India, invariably raised. Do you improve the lot of Hindus from within the system, or must you undermine it by assimilating to a foreign system? As for the specific content of religious Unitarianism, for example, Ramon Roy was confronted by the central question as to whether India should follow Christ or whether India should follow some Christ like figure in her own tradition who seemingly represented the same principles. So, yes, that basically summarizes Ramon Roy's, you can say, predisposition and his predicament as to how he was supposed to approach the religious question and reform in India. What do you think?
Yeah, it also describes to us a framework by which we should actually judge Rammohan's works, especially that a Unitarian, but his approach was that of an Orientalist. So, as we have learned from previous sessions as well, that an Orientalist is someone who idolizes or romanticizes the golden age past and tries to impose modern set of values within those, and then create a history down the line where it supposes that there has been degradation of those principles which has led to such calumny at this point of time. So therefore there is a need of a reform to go back to that great golden age back again, which is suspiciously very much similar to the modern age Western civilization. It actually completely reflects that kind of situation, like from values, from theology, from uh, what should I say, political. Yeah, we can also say that political uh, constitution itself as well, uh, which are modern in nature, we know, but these are all projected out there in that golden age as well. And to harken back to that and to replicate that right now through social reform, that is the main course for the Orientalist. And Rammohan took that sort of approach. Also, he had the weapons of the Orientalist scholarship as well, thanks to William Jones, H.H. Wilson, Colebrook, and others. He was using those also as well, but the catch is here he had that, what should I say, the spice of Unitarianism as well, to replicate the ethical Christ, the ethical teachings of Christ, so as to emancipate that society. Because, as we know, um, he had this notion, right, that these set of ethical teachings were there in Western society, therefore they could reach to that level of technological brilliance and so on. So, to elevate Indians as well, quote unquote, we should also adopt that. Now, even here it said, right, that Tuckerman and Channing, they were doing this set of work late, very late in their ages. Whereas in case of Rammohan, it was from 1815 itself. He had started with Vedanta Grantha in Bengali and other many such books, especially the translations of Upanishads. That started the whole controversy, and then the polemics uh, that ensued after that. So, I'm forgetting something. Nena, would you want to comment?
Yes, so he also basically forms the Unitarian Society before the his counterparts. That is also an interesting observation. He and William Adams, basically. Of course, he
Brilliant.
had the American contact through Henry Ware, so he would have been some at
Right. Right. Yeah, so I don't know if anything else we can comment on it. Um, what would you say? Okay, so for the audience, we would request you all to please subscribe and share our content. And if you want us to discuss about some set of topics which you think is important right now as well, and it's very interesting, please contact us through the email in the description itself. And yeah, comment on our the comment section too. You can please go over there and suggest us anything. And thank you for supporting us. Another thing, one must realize that Rammohan, so he knew about the whole ethical Christ, and he also, as we saw in the first pages, that he had his heart. Basically, he had full conviction in the Unitarian message itself. So the dilemma which he was facing was, okay, it wasn't uh, a European society. It was a completely different society in which he was trying to replicate the Unitarian revolution. In England and in Americas, it was yet too easy to do that because the overall society was Christianized, and all that they needed to do was appeal to them to liberalize themselves. But over here, it was a complete shift to another system, and it was way different, and which is why it was such a case of problem. What should I say? Uh, it was such a problematic case that he had to approach it with a very cautious and planned way, with some sort of sophistication as well, as we shall see in our successive sessions as well, as to how he approached his own uh, ways of doing the Unitarian work itself in India, the modernization. So the option which he had was either to promote the ethical Christ open and out, and to completely be clear uh, in front of his own audience, the large society, the large Hindu society, and the others as well, that okay, I'm trying to promote the ethical Christ in front of you. Also, the other part was that if he could use Orientalist scholarship to create or to harken back to some sort of a Christ-like figure within the tradition, also who seemingly represented the same principles as is noted over here in this paragraph. If he could use that to implement that whole Unitarian revolution itself. So this was the dilemma, and this is a very interesting situation, and I would like to know what audience would think about this. Yeah. हाँ, ब्रेन जी, आपको कुछ कहना हो इस विषय में, धर्म के विषय में जो हो रहा था इस समय में, अगर आपकी कोई टिप्पणी हो तो प्लीज कृपया बताइए, वरना ऑडियंस की क्या विचार है वो देख लेते. वेट अ मिनट, वेट अ मिनट. हाँ, क्वेश्चन. when did he read the gospel and was that Old Testament or New? So अगर आप राममोहन के बारे में बोल रहे हो, हाँ, अगर आप राममोहन के बारे में बोल रहे हो तो हाँ, उन्होंने गॉस्पेल पढ़ी थी। उसका टाइमलाइन तो उनके बॉस थे जॉन डिग्बी, उनके साथ उनका जब वे जब कार्यरत थे उनके साथ, तब वे गॉस्पेल और जितने भी बाकी पुस्तकें हैं पश्चिमी सभ्यता के, वो उन्होंने तभी पढ़ना चालू किया जब वो अंग्रेजी भी सीख रहे। तो उस समय में उन्होंने दोनों ओल्ड टेस्टामेंट और न्यू जो बाइबल है, कंप्लीट बाइबल, उन्होंने दोनों ही पढ़े थे। इतना ही नहीं, वे जो तीन सिरमपुर ट्रायो जो थे, विलियम विलियम कैरी, विलियम वॉर्ड एंड जॉशुआ मार्शमैन, उनके साथ भी वो काम कर रहे थे ताकि बाइबल को संस्कृत और बंगाली में भाषांतर किया जा सके, ट्रांसलेट किया जा सके। उस काम में भी वो उनके साथ कार्यरत थे। तो इससे हमें ये भी पता चलता है कि उन्होंने इस बीच थोड़ा ग्रीक और हिब्रू के शब्द भी सीख लिए थे विभिन्न अंग्रेजी पुस्तकों से ही। तो ये हमें उससे पता चलता है। एक और फिल्टर्ड वर्जन ऑफ न्यू टेस्टमेंट नहीं, उनके सामने कोई न्यू टेस्टमेंट का फिल्टर्ड वर्जन नहीं था, उन्होंने खुद उसका फिल्ट्रेशन किया है। अगर देखा जाए, जितना तक मुझे याद है, उन्होंने कभी थॉमस जेफरसन का जो जेफरसन बाइबल है, जिसमें जितने भी अंश है जहाँ पे जादू टोना वो सब लिखा हुआ है, उनको थॉमस जेफरसन ने हटा दिया था। पर उनके पास वो किताब थी, ये हमें पता नहीं है। देखना होगा, अगर हम लोग रिसर्च करके बाद में इसका करेक्ट डेटा लेके आएंगे। पर उन्हें वे राममोहन के अगर केस में देखा जाए तो उन्होंने डायरेक्टली न्यू टेस्टामेंट इन ग्रीक और लेट्स से विद ग्रीक एंड इंग्लिश ट्रांसलेशन दोनों ही पढ़े थे उन्होंने। तो उनके केस में ये पूरा जो विषय है बहुत ही अलग हो जाता है। उन्होंने एकदम ओरिजिनल पढ़ा है। इसलिए हम देखते हैं कि बाद में जाके वो जब ट्रिनिटेरियंस के साथ झगड़ा या तर्क वितर्क में भी लगते हैं, तब वो जो ओरिजिनल बाइबल है उनके जो स्पेसिफिक शब्द है हिब्रू के या ग्रीक के, वो उनको कोट करके उनके कॉन्टेक्स्ट दिखा के उनके साथ तर्क कर सकते हैं। इतना, और वो इतना घातक हुआ था, बाद में जाके हमें पता है कि उनके मृत्यु के बाद द प्रीसेस ऑफ जीसस, अब फिर अपील टू क्रिश्चियन पब्लिक 1, 2, 3 जो 3 वॉल्यूम है, उन चारों पुस्तकों को यूनिटेरियन चर्च में एकदम कंपलसरी कर दिया गया था, ताकि वो लोग मतलब वो पढ़ 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 के वो उसको रट ले, ताकि किसी भी ट्रिनिटेरियन के सामने अगर वो आ जाए तो वो अपना पक्ष रख सके। तो उनके विषय में हम यही कह सकते हैं। हाँ जी हाँ, नेनर, एनीथिंग यू वांटेड टू से?
Apologies for the disruption. We can continue reading from now, I think. Is the screen, is it readable?
हाँ हाँ, बिल्कुल, इट्स ओके।
Okay,
Totally fine.
okay. Then I should continue reading from here. Thus, it should come as no surprise that Rammohan's ideological development and career as a Hindu reformer reveals many twists and turns, contradictions, and inconsistencies. But on balance, I would argue that his preoccupation with an authentic Hindu tradition or golden age, which he sharply set off against a dark age of popularized religion and social abuses, stamped him as a figure in the camp of Orientalist modernizers. As a leading pioneer of the Reformation, his non-Westernizing sympathies were equally apparent in the way he attacked Christian Unitarianism through Indian circumstances. To be sure, Rammohan's precepts of Jesus were so thoroughly Unitarian in a European sense, and so sophisticated in theological erudition and subtlety that one could easily be misled by about the author's identity. Indeed, one has only to compare the precepts of Rammohan published in 1820 with a tract by Land Carpenter that appeared at approximately the same time entitled An Examination of the Charges Made Against Unitarians and Unitarianism, to understand the remarkable ideological kinship between the Bengali intellectual and Western Unitarians. M. Thomas, in his recent analysis of the debate between Ram Mohan and Marshman, calls it the first Christian intellectual encounter of a serious theological nature in modern India. Thomas, who has written the best book to date on the impact of Christianity on the Indian Renaissance, has unfortunately in this debate understressed the Unitarian Trinitarian aspect and perhaps overstressed the nationalist polemic aspect, whereby an Indian intellectual takes European Christianity to task. My own impression is that the precepts of Jesus are largely an extension of the debate in the West between Unitarianism and Orthodox Christianity. In this, he is counting even Protestants in Orthodoxy, because by that time Protestants were around for 200, 300 years. Right? Rammohan's primary
Take.
concern was to maintain the unity of God against all the false ideas and techniques devised by man to adulterate the purity of monotheistic faith. Thus, he repudiated all myths, mysteries, miracles, and images, made a mockery of the unity of the Godhead. So that's why he attacks the Trinity. Rammohan here
Yes.
resembled the familiar liberal and rationalist Unitarian, upholding the historical, ethic, ethical Christ while rejecting vicarious atonement, the Trinity, and other fabricated fables. Rammohan's view that justice and mercy were far more acceptable to God when sacrifice was equally Unitarian in spirit, as was his scriptural reliance on the synoptic gospels, with the emphasis on Jesus' teaching rather than the gospel of St. John with its mediation of Jesus. Joshua Marshman's argument is entirely a defense of Orthodox Trinitarian Christianity, and in the crux of his defense, as Thomas has ably shown, was to criticize Ram Mohan for teaching doctrines opposed to those held by the mass of real Christians of any age. The rational critical approach to scripture was in terms of a wider appeal to the chief weakness not only in Ram Mohan but in Unitarians generally. The Unitarian attack on orthodoxy was in fact an attack on the religion of the masses, where the unity of God was most grossly humiliated and violated, according to them. Unitarianism
Wow.
provided Ram Mohan and his successor with a thinking man's reformation and the attempt to transmit the new religion to the unintellectual, uncritical masses left the Bengali reformers in a great dilemma. Shortly after the debate, Ram Mohan and a former Baptist named William Adam formed the Calcutta Unitarian Committee. By 1823, Adam, Ram Mohan, and Dwarkanath Tagore seem also to have established a Unitarian press in North Calcutta. In that same year, Ram Mohan, under the pseudonym of Ram Dos, conducted another debate in the local press with an Orthodox Christian physician named Putler. Remarks by Putler make it evident that Ram Mohan was considered by Europeans to have become a Unitarian, a term of disrepute to the Orthodox. The debate was no mere theological conflict as in the case of Marshman, faced with narrow bigoted attacks on Hinduism in particular and Asians in general by a member of the ruling foreign elite. Ram Mohan was forced into a defensively nationalist position. But because Ram Mohan was a modernizer and not a revivalist, he faced his opponent as an Orientalist, would a westernizer. So he is basically saying that when he was countering, you can say, the Orthodox Christians. Earlier, the attacks were not so much on Hinduism as much they were on their Unitarianism. But later, in this case of this titler, this another Orthodox Christian, probably a Protestant only actually, but that person probably started attacking Hinduism, and Ram Mohan, for given his heritage, might have felt offended in some manner. Probably, maybe he attacked the Vedanta in a manner that he didn't like or something. So, in that, from there, he began to take the position of an Orientalist to defend Hinduism against the Westernizing. This is well as written Ramon's reply to a certain queries directed against the Vedanta, as we just discussed. Yes, so yeah, they were attacking the Vedanta in his conception. Basically. Printed in the Brahmanical magazine on November 15, 1823. Dr. Tytler had accused Ramon of reading into the Vedanta the sublime message of Christ. Since only the Christian scriptures were revealed, Rammohan's interpretations was a fraud. In reply, Rammohan, with his customary analytical approach, proceeded to prove that the message of the Vedanta not only explained the unity of God, but did also in a way superior to the Judeo-Christian Bible. Unlike the Bible, the Vedanta did not attempt to categorize the attributes of the Almighty, a gesture that Rammohan found both anthropomorphic and futile. That Ram Mohan was now using Unitarianism in an Indian way was evident by his attack on the Trinity. He argued that whereas Christianity required a blood sacrifice to expiate the sins of man, the Vedanta taught the only means of attaining victory over sin is sincere repentance and solemn meditation. In the following quotation, it is clear that the Bengali reformer had made a kind of cultural transference from the synoptic gospels to Shankaracharya. The sin which mankind contracts against God by the practice of wickedness is believed for us by expiated by these penances, and not as supposed by the querist, by the blood of a son of man or son of God who never participated in our transgressions. So here is a place where he actually goes against Jesus in a very vague way. What do you think about this, Rishi?
So in this paragraph of Rammohan's so-called defense of Vedanta. So for the audience, we will discuss this very important text as well, Brahminical magazine, because this is cited as his his so-called defense of Hinduism was through this magazine. To a series of objections which were launched by Tytler in a pseudonym in one of the papers at that time. Yeah, what's interesting over here is this that unlike the Bible, the Vedanta did not attempt to categorize attributes of the Almighty, right? So, in Christian Bible, the Trinitarianism comes from that fact, right? That the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost are one in material or one in spirit, but different personalities, as they say, right? That's the whole dogma of Trinitarianism. So in that, they are relegated to three sets of attributes as well, if I'm not mistaken, Nina, right? In Trinitarian theology, mm, Father is the creator, and the other two, I do not know, but other two have a certain set of attributes particular to them. But altogether, they are all attributes of God. So now this kind of framing by Rammohan was found to be anthropomorphic. And since it is anthropomorphic, so this is superstitious, as was the case for any Unitarian at that time. So he had to revolt against it. But now, to do that and also to so-called defend Vedanta, he now just opposing the objection of the Unitarians through the Vedanta language. Yet the opposition to Trinitarianism is in fact Unitarian, but the cloak that he has taken on is that of Vedanta. And then he even promotes this idea that supposedly Vedanta teaches the only means of attaining victory over sin is sincere repentance and solemn meditation. Like, what the heck was going on? What kind of doctrine is this? Even I do not know anybody who has ever read, anybody who has ever listened to any Bhagavata Parayanam from any good established guru or even a Pandit, so called. They will never get this set of idea at all. I do not know where is he getting this from any Vedanta, because this is completely similar to Christian idea, because
Yes,
this whole notion
the
of
obsession, first
repenting.
of
Yeah,
all, with victory over sin, with repentance, these words kind of indicate where he's getting his ideas from.
absolutely, absolutely.
So, yes, we will probably cover this text later in another stream as well because it deserves a more comprehensive takedown. I shall continue reading from here.
Okay.
Equally interesting was Rammohan's use of the comparative religious approach, which constituted another marked difference between himself and his Western Unitarian counterparts. Canning and Tuckerman maneuvered primarily in one religious tradition and aimed to reform it, whereas Rammohan was challenged by the need to reconcile at least two major faiths. In the process, Rammohan was compared to think comparatively, with the result that his vision sharpened the refractingly fanciful, leaving a narrow sectarian view of the universe behind forever. He could, for example, in the same reply to Titler, rebuff his opponent for attacking popular Hinduism by pointing to the comparative malpractices in popular Christianity. So that is kind of a yeah, he's not refuting him directly, but he's basically taking jibes. Um, A Hindu would also be justified in taking a standard of Christianity, the system of religion which almost universally prevailed in Europe previous to the 15th century, which is still followed by the majority of Christians with all its idols, crucifixes, saints, miracles, pecuniary absolutions from sin, trinity, transubstantiation, relics, holy water, and other idolatrous machinery. Rammohan could argue that as the authentic Christian tradition was submerged and corrupted, so the authentic Hindu tradition is likewise submerged and corrupted. He willingly admitted that our holy Vedanta and our ancient religion have been disregarded by the generality of moderns. This approach, infused with a modernist outlook, placed the Hindu Reformation movement on an Orientalist foundation, as we have discussed earlier. This starts with the
Yes.
thesis of a golden age where everything was pure and were far more modernist than the modern times itself. Indigenous traditions could be defended at the same time as they were modified according to progressive values in contemporary Western societies. Though the foundation was a precarious one, it saved the Hindu Reformation repeatedly from the snare of militant nationalism. It is in this context that we ought to assess the social aspect of the Hindu Reformation. There is little doubt that Rammohan was as much inspired by the social gospel of Unitarianism as he was by its rational religion. But it is well to be reminded of the difference between historical circumstances in Bengal and in the West. We have already noted that Unitarians in England were among the first to point an accusing finger at nominal Christians for ignoring the plight of the proletariat in the new urban industrial centers. But in India in the early 19th century, there was no fundamental change in technology, no industrial revolution, no industrial urban centers, and no industrial proletariat. Moreover, foreign rule in India placed social reform in the context of cultural encounter. The question of social reform, therefore, was less the need to cope with consequences of changing social, economic, and political order, as it was a question of British attitudes to Indian culture and Indian responses to those attitudes. Because of the profound influences of Orientalist heritage, social reform entailed an internal revitalization aimed at bringing India up to the level of the other progressive nations of the world. Thus, the inventor Ram Mohan Roy used the building blocks provided by the Orientalist scholarship and adapted Unitarian social reform to Bengali circumstances. In so doing, it is important to point out that he was no more traditionalists or revivalists, then were Western Unitarians who referred back to the historic Christ of ethical teachings to promote modernist ends. With a Puritan fervor, quite possibly reinforced by his Islamic background, Ram Mohan attributed social evils in Hindu religion and society to the poisonous effects of idolatrous notions, quote unquote, which by the middle period of Indian history had completely undermined the pure Upanishadic belief in the unity of the Supreme Being as the sole ruler of the universe, which is complete nonsense. Such words are not uttered in our scriptures anywhere.
Indeed, indeed, and frankly, the number of what should I say? The number of literature that has come out specifically on Upanishadic doctrine is much more in the medieval period. So this whole notion that he is speaking about here is complete nonsense.
Very much so. Of more interest, perhaps, in terms of social action is the way Ram Mohan altered the object of Unitarian compassion in the West to suit the special historical circumstances in Bengal. Unitarians increasingly worked to alleviate the sufferings of the industrial proletariat. Ram Mohan chose the Bengali Hindu woman as his proletariat. With extremely important implications for his successors, he saw in her so-called depressed condition the root cause of social immobility in India. The new social conscience and consciousness of Unitarianism was in Ramon almost entirely directed to the miserable state of Hindu women. He found them uneducated and illiterate, deprived of property rights, married before puberty, imprisoned in purdah, murdered at widowhood by a barbaric custom of immolation known as one has to only read Rammohan's work on social reform to realize that most of it deals with one aspect or another of man's humanity to women in Bengal. The conclusion is that only by freeing women and by treating them as human beings could Indian society free itself from social stagnation. That was Rammohan's thesis basically. He uses his own words in this paragraph. By 1829, it appears that Ram Mohan had abandoned the Unitarian Committee and had helped to form a new kind of organization known as the Brahmo Sabha. Only relevant document that might have suggested what Ram Mohan intended to accomplish to the Sabha is the trust deed for the new quote unquote church, as they call it in the trust deed itself. If one call it that, signed by Ram Mohan and his friends on January 23, 1830. Unfortunately, except for a few general universalist Unitarian principles contained in the document, it is impossible to say whether Rammohan hoped the Brahmo Sabha to be a domesticated form of the Unitarian Church or a general meeting place for people of all faiths and to congregate with. What makes it even more difficult to ascertain Rammohan's purpose is the fact that 10 months after signing the deed, he left for England, never to return. Between Rammon's death in 1833 and the arrival in Calcutta of the American Unitarian missionary C.H.A. Dahl in 1855, Western Unitarianism seemed to have no appreciable effect on the modernizing Bengali intelligentsia. In fact, until the 1840s, the movement advanced little ideologically or institutionally. Ramchandra Vidyavagish was the intellectual leader or spiritual preceptor of the Brahmo Sabha during that decade. Vidyavagish, however, extremely limited in his knowledge and appreciation of Western Unitarianism, could not continue the momentous work started by Ram Mohan. For all practical purposes, the Sabha just became another Hindu sect with a Vedantic bias. In 1843, Devendranath Thakur changed the name of the Brahmo Sabha to Brahmo Samaj and revitalized the movement considerably. But there is no evidence that he was motivated in doing so by Unitarian considerations. We don't know that when Charles Dahl arrived in Calcutta to start a new mission in November 1855, he immediately established contacts with Devendranath and other Brahmos. Apparently, Devendranath's suspicion of foreigners alienated Dahl, who was not made to feel welcome at Brahmo meetings and Dahl later accused people of denying free speech and discussion at Brahmo meetings. So we can probably stop here and discuss a little before we continue. Any thoughts on this part till here?
After Rammohan's death, we get to see this, what should I say, halt in that whole movement, right? The Orientalist modernizer, which would use the Unitarian ethics cloaked in the Orientalist language, that got stalled after his death, especially after establishing the Brahmo Sabha itself. About Ramchandra Vidyavagish, this guy was this is a very important guy, in fact. So won't be won't be exposing much of his information, but he was one of the original founders of Brahmo Sabha. Anybody who has ever read the trust deed of the Brahmo Sabha, which is openly free in internet, there is a signature as well, along with the others, uh, with Rammohan. So after Rammohan, he was the one to be the leader, but given his training as a Pandit, although a partner of Rammohan, although could be called as a Unitarian, just like his brother as well was called. We won't be saying much more about his brother because that's for the other streams. He's also a very interesting guy. Ramchandra Vidyabhagesh, as is noted here, he didn't have, uh, according to David Kopp, he didn't have much appreciation or knowledge of Western Unitarianism, which is true. He had knowledge of Western religion. If we read some of his works, we can get that. But he wasn't very appreciative of it. That's true. So he tried to frame the Brahmo Sabha movement uh, after Rammohan towards a line where it had to be placed under a Hindu system of framework. Although the interpretation was questionable at best, but it still had to be Hindu. And that is because of personal inclinations of Ramchandra Vidyavagish himself, as is noted. And hence, Sabha became just another. It wasn't considered a Hindu sect, frankly, but it acted as such, if one could say so. And then, as we see, after a long time, 20 years after that, Mr. Dahl comes and joins the Brahmo Sabha again. Uh, but the problem that lies over here is with the successor of Ramchandra Vidyavagish, Devendranath Tagore, or let's say Devendranath Tagore. So, although he revitalized, as is noted here, to from Brahmo Sabha to Brahmo Samaj, the famous Brahmo Samaj, he also launched um, uh, what should I say, mouthpiece, a very famous mouthpiece, which represented the one of the we could say it was one of the linchpins of intellectual development at that time in Bengal. Uh, Many intellectuals of later day Bengal then come out from this movement as well. We will all see that later on. But Devendranath had this curious thing within him. There is quite a reason for that, but his suspicion of foreigners, especially suspicion of Christians, was very apparent, and I think Dahl noticed this, which is why he's talking about apparently Tagore denying free speech and discussion. Maybe uh, Tagore, as was the case with him in history, he didn't really like interventions of foreigners and especially Christians. He was very, very against them, anti-Christian. We could say that as well. So Dahl
Which
may
is
be,
kind of the opposite of his father, right? His father was
yeah,
far more open
complete,
to the Christians.
completely. His father was, in fact, very sad because of the kind of activities which he was engaged in. There are such letters as well, but we will not discuss it over here. Yeah, please, Nina.
Yeah, yeah, we can continue ahead. On the other hand, Dahl seemed to have developed a long and enduring relationship with Devendranath's art critic and rival, Keshav Chandra Sen. We can only speculate how much influence the Reverend Dahl had on Keshav and his followers who broke with Adi. original Brahmo Samaj in 1866 to form an association of their own. Dal had come to Calcutta believing that Rammohan Roy, author of the Precepts of Jesus, had been a Unitarian Christian like himself. Dal seemed convinced that Keshav's new Brahmo association would ultimately move in the same direction, and that Keshav was Rammohan's true successor. Not only had he come to look upon Keshav as his own son, but after years of cheering him, instructing him, and helping him, Keshav's theism in its last distillation was the theism of Jesus. Keshav so admired Dal that he welcomed the American missionary into the Brahmo Samaj as its only non-Indian member, allowed him to sign the Covenant, and gave him every opportunity to spread Unitarian literature and ideas among Brahmos in Bengal and elsewhere. Through Dal's efforts, thousands of copies of the complete works of Channing, Emerson, and Parker were circulated among Brahmos. We can surmise that Dal influenced Keshav about the validity of the Unitarian social gospel as well, and his activism was also respected by the more radical wing of the Calcutta intelligentsia. He started schools for boys in Calcutta, supported female education and emancipation generally, and helped the urban poor in various ways. In this context, of some consequence of the visit to Calcutta by land carpenter's daughter, Mary, in 1866 to promote the Unitarian social gospel in India, she visited Vidyasagar and many of the younger Brahmo radicals. Her warmest admirer and friend was Manomohan Ghosh, the Bengali Unitarian, while her first visitor upon arriving in Calcutta was Keshav Singh, whom she viewed as, at the time as the truest follower of her father's friend, Rammohan Roy. Between 1866 and 1872, Keshav Singh was deeply enthusiastic about the Unitarian social gospel, which he observed firsthand during a trip to Great Britain in 1870. He seemed convinced that the British reform efforts could be duplicated in India. Thus, under his direction, the Indian Reform Association was established in November 1870 to promote the social and moral reformation of the natives of India. To accomplish this end, it is proposed to avoid as far as possible mere theories and speculation, and to aim chiefly at action. Five sections of the association were set up: charity, temperance, women's improvement, mass education, and cheap literature. For charity, they should set up a social service community that's stood ready to help the distressed during times of natural catastrophe. Predating the Ramakrishna mission by at least 2 decades, Keshav sent volunteers to Behala in 1871 to help fight the crippling effects of a malaria epidemic. Keshav also placed temperance high among his social reforms and joined the Temperance Society in its effort to reduce the import of whiskey from England and to penalize its distributors in India. In the West, in the West, reform is now looked upon extreme alcohol consumption as the root cause of poverty. The magnitude of the problem, especially among the industrial proletariat, was immense. At the time Keshav visited London, it was reported that London's 100,000 pubs were laid end to end. They would have stretched a full 30 miles. In East London alone, every fifth shop was a gin shop. The most kept special steps to help even tiny mites reach the counter. The pubs featured penny glasses of gin for children, too often child alcoholics needed a stomach pump. Children less than 5 years old knew the raging agonies of delirium tremens or died from cirrhosis of the liver, all the products of 100 million a year trade. In Bengal, it was the Western educated who appear to have suffered most from excessive drinking habits and the subsequent physiological, psychological, and sociological effects. The general perusal of biographical sources conveys the impression that almost every Calcutta elite family had cases of young men who died directly from the disease or who committed suicide as a result. Pyari Charan Sarkar, who started the Temperance Society in Calcutta, saw his own brother die of the disease. Keshav organized bands of hope among the young all over Bengal to prevent the habit from materializing among college students who, from Rajnarayan's time, imbibed liquor as a badge of Western civilization. This was also seen during the time of the Rosians, who basically believed
Yeah,
that
yeah,
drinking was a social achievement for them, and of course, many became drunkards
indeed,
as a result.
completely. And then they have this movement of temperance.
Yeah, so they invent the problem and they they also try to solve it.
Yeah.
To, to improve the condition of women, Keshav sought to promote the intellectual, moral, and social development by means of girls' schools, adult schools, and model schools, publication of books and periodicals, and communication meetings. As shown previously, this was considered by Rammohan as a crucial area of reform. It was in the fields of mass education and cheap literature that Keshav made his most radical departures as a social reformer. For the first time, Bengali reformer acknowledged in a practical program that the peasants and workers must be reached for a full-scale improvement of Indian society. Whether, as some Indian Marxists have suggested, Keshav met Karl Marx in Europe is irrelevant since the program he established was influenced more by the Salvation Army and Unitarians than by social groups. Nevertheless, Keshav was a pioneer in his attempt to shift at least partially the target of social reform in Bengal away from the underprivileged female to the underprivileged masses. He set up an industrial art school in Calcutta to teach laborers such crafts as tailoring, clock repair, printing, lithography, and engraving. He established a night school, the first of its kind among Brahmo Samajas in South Asia. Perhaps most important in the long run, Keshav's achievement in awakening mass consciousness by printing a paper known as Shulabh Samachar, which was designed not for the Bhaktulok or scholars, but for the people who do not have much time but must labor day and night. We want to offer them news of their country, of the world, instruct them in morality, entertain them with stories, inform them of their history, inspire them with the tales of great men, and teach them about the differences between superstition and science. Salvation through class struggle was not the message of Shubha Samachar for the working man. Rather, as with most liberal publications of the 19th century, hope for the poor lay in cultivation of moral discipline, self-reliance, and a good basic education. The function of the newspaper was clearly to convey current events, classroom knowledge, and moral instruction in simple, lucid Bengali prose to those who could afford a single price for the issue. Far more than any other paper of the period, it was immensely popular. After 14 months of publication, from its first appearance on November 15, 1870, it had sold 281,149 copies. Even as late as 1879, 1 year after the split of Keshav Samaj, the Shurab Samachar still sold 190,000 copies. On the spiritual side of Unitarianism, Dal's most important conquest in the Keshavite organization was Pratap Chandra Majumdar. Majumdar and Dal were for years Brahmo missionaries for non-Bengali urban Indian urban elites on the subcontinent. Dal, in fact, saw himself as a dual emissary of the American Unitarian Church and of Keshav the Brahmo Samaj of India. In South India, Majumdar propagated the faith in Madras, while Dal lectured in Bangalore. Majumdar's career as a dedicated missionary may well have been inspired by Dal's example. Dal urged Brahmos to preach the new rational religion with apostolic faith, self-denial, and trust. Dal's sermons and lectures, which aimed at wedding Christian Unitarianism with Indian Brahmoism, proved remarkably similar to Majumdar's own. Though for obvious reasons, Pratap Chandra never referred to Christ in his mission doors. It was the image of the ethical Jesus which Rammohan Roy had beautifully articulated and which Das stressed in his lectures that appealed to him more and more in his later years. The critical issue in which Majumdar ultimately supported Dal as against most other Brahmos, including Keshav, was whether Christ was indeed the last word among universal reformers. Most Brahmos argued that he was one among equals like Buddha, Confucius, and Muhammad, but Majumdar favored the idea that all reformers were most perfectly personified in Christ. Yes, so yeah, that was on another person and a lot on Keshav Sen also. Any thoughts on him, Rishi?
Uh, uh, Many information we came to know now. Uh, I don't know what thoughts. I guess, yeah, he was much more, I guess, into activism mode rather than polemical or academic uh, persuasion in case of Rammohan. So he was making all sets of organizations, reform organizations, trying to approach the laborer, not laborers, I think it was for normal people. I mean, his access to laborers was not that good. We will discuss about that later on as well, about Keshav Sen. But
Yes, so
I guess he
huh,
was very
so
much,
a
but this is
summary of
true.
what
Yeah.
happens later is basically that this Dal and Pratap Chandra Majumdar and Keshav Singh, they fall out. So there is a huge fallout between them, and Keshav Singh basically takes a different path, you can say, within his Brahmoism from them, and yeah, this Unitarianism kind of goes a different way.
Yeah, he gets into the that whole mode of what should I say, mysticism. He'll get into that sort of persuasion later on, because at that time when he was revolting against Devendranath Thakur and the previous iteration of Brahmo Samaj, then he was a English educated guy, totally influenced by radical ideas. So he wanted all sorts of activism at that time, and the revolutionary kind. So the Unitarian, I guess, gave him suggestions, and he worked on those, and these were the organizations that he came up with. But as far as reach to, I mean, he was very much famous within the middle class section. That is very much known at that time. He was the uh, representation of the young generation, and he was also the leader of them. Unlike Devendranath, who was seen as the old orthodox, what should I say, the old orthodox regressive elite. Who were trying to control the young youth, uh, the youthful urge to rebel or to radically change society. They were going against it. So yeah, and that was represented by Keshav Sen, and we see how he was trying to imbibe the ethical Christ again and again. And then even Pratap Chandra Majumdar, the one who was being talked about, whom we'll later on will know, he was called as Reverend Pratap Chandra Majumdar for a very specific reason, because he was not just interested in the ethical Christ, he was also very interested in the actual Christ as well, the Orthodox one, quote unquote. But we'll get to see that later on. Yeah.
Yes, so I think at this point we can probably call an end to our stream. So that is basically
Yes.
where we leave off. That we read about Ram Mohan today, about his connection with Unitarian theology. The nature of Unitarian theology itself was quite well explained in this book. So I think that there is no better explanation you can find of it elsewhere about its founders, Land Carpenter, and the American as well who engaged with it, and also about how Ram Mohan was engaging with this, you can say, reformism of the Unitarian faith, especially how his entire focus was more of it on the question of women and reforming their status in society. So yes, that was a lot more that we discussed.
Yeah, that was his proletariat. That was his audience that he wanted. But even at that, I would say that was way late. Like the whole woman emancipation project that he harped upon, it was way late. I think in 1820, after 1820s, he gets into that with the anti-sati controversy that happens in Bengal's history or India's history. At that time, he gets into
Very much.
all those discussions in his second pamphlet.
And also, as we have discussed, you see very clearly the kind of frameworks he is relying on apart from the Unitarian one, specifically
Yeah.
the Orientalist one. From time to time, we see that his basic framework of approaching specifically the Hindu religion is always the Orientalist framework. Over that, to pass a judgment, that is when he falls back to, you can say, first the Unitarian framework, and second, even sometimes in his earlier times, you can see that Islamic streak sort of.
Yep. Absolutely. That statement which he gave, right, for Vedanta, that Vedanta apparently says that to be victorious against sin, you must repent and then you must engage in meditation. Now, what
Yes.
he would do is, so to explain the audience over here, so what he would do in Bengali, he would say that, okay, so right, the prayaschitta. So, if you do papam, then you do prayaschitta for that, and uh, after that you do nididhyasan, as he would say, upasana. Upasana. This was the word that he would use. So you do upasana of that God. So this is that message that he wanted to give every single time. But the fact is, he wasn't really into those things at all. And we shall explain this later on in other streams, as we are saying. So what he was doing is that he was importing a framework from outside and then couching it in our language, and then producing it as some sort of legitimate doctrine which our religion apparently disseminated. But that too, when, because someone will say, right, that, okay, where is this? So he would say, then, harkening back to the orientalist framework, that, oh, it used to be at that age, now we do not have any traces of it because you all have what should I say, polluted that whole golden age religion right now, and we need to bring that back. So listen to me and work on this.
Yes.
So this is the
And
kind of uh, yeah, no, please.
and you can also see that it is a very logical thing that he also jumped his ship to Unitarianism from that perspective, because the Unitarians also believe everything that came after Christ, apart from you can say his direct teachings, the institutions, the rituals, everything, all that is legitimate, except just the you can say the moral teachings of Christ. Everything else is you can say just story or whatever. But
Absolutely true. And I would ask you, Niner, because you know more on this. This is, by the way, a successive step from the Protestant Reformation, right? So Protestant revolted against the clergy of uh, the
yes,
then Catholic clergy, and went into sola scriptura. And in this, the Unitarians are going sola Jesus, like ethical Jesus, like only the sole ethical Jesus matters. The rest of it is bullshit. We do not put on.
so yeah, the basic thing is that from the time of Protestants, religion has been basically boiled down to this point where it's uh, basically just a set of vague ethical ideals that you can have centered around the human in a sense.
Yeah, centered around human, and what should I say? Nudges the human emotional aspects, even exploits that and tries to play on that, and the rest of it, which are so-called, what should I say, putting blinkers, or putting cages, aka, so the Christians of the earlier version would have said that, okay, this is for disciplining the Christian, but now this will be said as, okay, this is stopping, this is actually oppressing me, and it's a hindrance to my freedom. So that needs to be removed. I think that sort of behavior also came with it, right?
It's very much so. And this specific, you can also, as we have discussed, Rammohan had that specific inclination of social reform. As we have discussed in the very start of the stream, among the 3 points that basically define Unitarianism, the second was the idea of social reform as a core tenet itself. So that
Yeah,
is the reason why he pursued his goals at all. It was a religious inclination in a sense.
true. And I would like to know this from you, Nina. So this social reform over here, right? This point, the social reform or emancipation, in which all known penalized classes and groupings such as workers, peasants, and women were to be elevated through education and extension of civil rights to participate fully in the benefits of the modern civilization. Now, was it that actually what they were saying about social reform was to dissociate the larger mass of the so-called non-elites which were into traditional frameworks? They wanted to bring them back into their fold so as to make themselves powerful as well in front of the traditionalist in their society, because they were fighting against them, right, while trying to promote their own ideas, and they were, the one thing that they lacked was manpower, right? So was this so idea of social reform also uh, this mechanism? I would like to know that from you.
Perhaps we can probably cover this in a future stream as well. This can be quite
Hmm.
a pointer we can contemplate.
Yeah, I think so. We need to do that because right? Social reform or emancipation; these words have very positive feeling right now. Like if I talk about this in some sort of even in a critical sense, we are not even outright condemning it. We are critically analyzing it. Even that is seen as sacrilege. Like what are you doing? This is not good. This is very bad. Are you trying to promote some sort of regression ideas?
Yes,
So I
that
think we
that is
need to
true because
discuss
we
this.
don't, apart from you can say the streak of Burkean conservatism, which advocates for you can say gradual change over uh, more you can say very radical change. I
Hmm.
don't see a lot of critique of this emancipating attitude that everyone must be emancipated from certain societal or you can say legal restrictions
Yeah,
because for a reason certain things exist, right? Because
indeed.
it was not like in the 19th century that these emancipations had an end, because as we see
Hmm.
even going up till now this cycle of emancipation is going on to no end. There are things you need to remove your shackles from all the time apparently. So
Hmm.
that is the kind of logical end liberalism is taking us towards.
Yeah, it seems like that. Like any kind of label itself is now seen as a what should I say, a hindrance to freedom, hindrance to human dignity or individual progress or freedom or self-expression. So even
Very much.
biological limitations should be uh, trumped over. You should be trumping over the
Identity
biological
markers,
limitations, the natural limitations.
belonging to a group, then even judgments of a group on an individual. The end goal is the individual just decides for themselves everything under the sun. But of course, that
Yeah,
is not something a society can be based upon.
indeed. That's not a society then, after all. Society needs to have collectivize, like an attitude of collectivizing at least. Like people need to be respecting the other. They should have some boundaries. But if all
And not
boundaries
just
are
respecting the
thrown
other,
off,
their actions, they must be oriented towards a goal that is higher than their own you can say self-sustained needs. Otherwise,
brilliant
you
point.
never leave that hedonism in a sense, which is
Yeah,
pointless.
absolutely, absolutely. Amazing, amazing. I
So
like the
yes,
discussion.
with that we can probably call off an end to today's stream. Are there any
Yeah,
comments in the chat?
yeah. Mr. Shekhar has.
Hmm. So, more specifically, we can say utilitarians are more into promoting Jesus than even society or Bible,
Hmm.
because their
So
whole thing
basically, like
revolves around Jesus
Unitarian.
and his ethical teachings.
Huh. Amazing. And no wonder, right? Even today, we see that Unitarians are, even in America, the Unitarians are with the left wing, Unitarian Christians or Unitarian
Very much
Universalists.
so. They align with all the progressive causes because progressivism is a tenet of their religion in a sense. That social reform part
Yeah,
is that only.
absolutely. Cosmopolitanism, all of those things came as a result of it as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, in a way, it is a very hollowed out religion without any basis, but yeah, it still exists. Yeah,
Dilution
I
is
think
there. Yeah,
that I think that's all the comments. Not much more.
yeah. These were
Can
the
you see
comments.
anything more?
Nah,
I think you took the rest,
not
right?
worth
Earlier.
our. Yeah, I've addressed the earlier ones. You were busy in a.
Okay, okay. Uh,
Yeah.
sure then.
You can
We
maybe you
can.
can comment on that as well if you want.
Which one? Can you highlight the
Yeah,
question?
this.
When did he read the gospel? Was that Old Testament or New? Does he mean
So it was on
Rammohan Roy?
Ram. Yeah, yeah, Rammohan Roy.
So I can only guess. I do not have a definite answer to this, but first he had come into contact with the missionary William Carey in 1890s, where he was helping him with translation work, and later in 1800s he was serving as a clerk for John Digby. Either of those two people would have introduced him to Christian scriptures. That is my assumption.
Hmm. Hmm. I kind of
Most
said the
likely
same
William
thing
Carey,
as you said. Acha, acha. Okay.
because he's a missionary anyway. Uh, other than him, who would
Yeah.
not?
Wait. Also, we can connect that as well, right, Niner? The first stream that we had made on this series about Ram Basu,
Yes, we can connect that. But
because
we have
he used to
so
meet him,
we
right?
have the exact story of Ram Basu. We don't know exactly how Ramon Roy was exposed to Bible or the Christian teachings
Ah,
in his early. So his story is a bit vague in his early years.
true, true. But at least researchers are clear that Ram Basu like Ram Mohan Roy had contacts with this guy while he was
Huh.
in Fort William College.
So the reason why we might be suspect that it's not William Carey is that Ram Mohan himself admits to a letter to John Digby that he did not know proper, like you can say, other than administrative English, he was not able to read proper English before around 1814. So if the Bible,
Hmm.
unless he read it in some crude Bengali version, he probably would have not read it earlier than that.
Also, I informed the audience about this as well, right? Maybe you know this as well. So, Rammohan was also helping in translation of Bible in Sanskrit, right, for the missionary trio at Sirampur. At least that's what Sitaram
Yes,
Goel
I think so.
alleged.
Yes, I think so. Not the Bible also. I know he was helping in translation to Bengali. I'm not sure if he was helping in translation to Sanskrit, but Bengali he was definitely helping.
Okay. Bengali. Mm-hmm. Because in that only he came across the monotheism portions, right, where he at least
Yes,
that's what I've read, that he was like shocked to see no
Uh,
Trinitarian, like mention of no Trinitarian doctrine at all in Bible.
yes. Yeah, that is there.
Yeah, so I guess
Yeah, that is all
we
the
end
questions.
our stream.
Yeah. And please do like, share, and subscribe to our video. Do add a comment if you for anything you added find interesting.
Okay,
Oh, there is a question.
okay, new.
Yes, yes. Has Ramon Roy converted to the mainstream Christianity? Is utilitarianism mainstream? And did he believe in Jesus being the only way to salvation? As we just discussed, he had this vague idea that the Vedanta taught people that salvation from sin was through meditation and through what was the other word, Rishi, if you recall?
Repentance.
Repentance. So that was his idea. So it was not exactly the kind of Christian salvation, but he was finding a very weird mix of whatever he read from Orientalists and Christians put together. And did he convert
Also,
to
he never.
mainstream Christianity? No, he was Unitarian.
No.
You can watch our entire stream if you from the beginning. You'll understand the nature of Unitarianism much better. It was different from the Christianity of missionaries, such as William Carey, who are, say, Baptists. They believe in Trinity, the concept of Trinity, and a lot of other rituals. Like Baptists, they believe in baptism as a very crucial ritual. So on. So yeah, he was anti-ritual to the point he did not even like baptism.
Absolutely. And on the second portion, did he believe in Jesus being the only way of salvation? Anything you want to say?
I addressed that he was believing that the Vedantic way is through meditation and repentance. That is the way to you basically get rid of your sins. That is what he mentions. As we just saw it earlier.
Hmm. Yeah. My tidbit would be to Sri Harsha that did he believe in Jesus being the only way to salvation? Not really. He wasn't into that. But uh, we will show this as well that he considered Jesus as the greatest human ever to be on earth. We will show that as well
Yes,
in
as we were
our
just reading
further.
that Keshav Chand, this kind of thing was in contention with the later Brahmos. There was a whole debate between the later Brahmos, between Keshav Sen and others, whether Jesus is a central figure or Jesus is one among many, such as even they used to include Mahaprabhu Chaitanya among
Uh,
their own, you could say, pantheon in a sense. Well, strange pantheon they
yep.
concocted.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. Mm. We have even so Sri Harsha. We have even Rammohan's quotations, which are very harsh, very controversial to even hear about Jesus vis-a-vis our great people. We will discuss those later.
Yes. So we are basically going to do perhaps more than one stream on Rammohan Roy, which will cover most of these issues, starting off from today's stream.
Yes,
So yes, I think that
exactly.
is all the comments. We can probably call up the stream now. Thank you for all the viewers
Yeah.
for listening in, and Jai Shri Ram.